Hey, welcome back to the Leadership Studio. Hope you guys are doing well. We're seeing some nice results in your work. We're encouraged that you're going to do more. The other thing I wanted to give you a notice on is for some of you, I guess in some of the coming weeks, we're going to all get together for an evening together at the Spaghetti Warehouse. So keep that in mind. We'll do that after one of these evening episodes here at the studio. Tonight we have Tara Black with us. Tara is the head of development over at the Houston Area Women's Center. Tara, thank you for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so we're talking about fundraising, talking about development, and you're one of the best in town. You have a rich history that we're going to go through.
You're very kind. Thank you.
But let's start. One of the first questions we often ask people here is, if you're writing a book on fundraising, Tara, what do some of your chapters look like? Some of the important steps for you in doing fundraising?
I would say that the three most important chapters would be listen, learn, and ask. Only because as development professionals, we are taught to listen very well and often taught to be quiet, listen to your prospect, listen to your donors. You really want to know what they're thinking. And if you are quiet and you are listening, they will tell you everything you need to know. Leading you to the learning chapter, you're able to then put a proposal together, and then very easily moving into the ask chapter, you can make a solicitation ask.
Wow. And is it that simple always?
No, it's not that simple. Sometimes it's much easier than that, and I'll give you an example. I actually went on a call. This was my first visit with a prospect, and he walked in and said, "I have 15 minutes. What do you want? How much?"
Wow.
And luckily, I'd done my research on him, and I asked for a gift of $250,000. He said, "No, but I'll give you $100,000," and that's how we began our relationship.
Wow.
The easiest ask I've ever made. Typically, the ask they take place over a series of months, sometimes years. It depends on the amount of the ask. It depends on the people that are involved in making the ask. Sometimes I'm the perfect person to make the ask. Other times it's my CEO or a board member that's better suited to make the ask.
Yeah.
So it's not always that easy.
Tell us about that part about you or your CEO. How do you decide when it's you or your CEO that's going to make that ask? And what is the breakdown maybe in terms of your time at the Houston Area Women's Center and other places that you've been? Is it you most of the time, or is it the CEO?
Currently at the Houston Area Women's Center, it's primarily me. My CEO does have a portfolio of approximately, I'd say 25 to 30 prospects that she's been cultivating over the past several years, or in some instances over the past several months. And so in that case, it's much more appropriate for her to make the ask.
Yeah.
Typically with newer prospects, it's usually me that's making the ask. My CEO makes the majority of our board ask. She's very involved with the board, spends a lot of time cultivating the board relationships. But outside of that, it's primarily me that's making the ask.
Wow. And how long have you been there?
I've been there for 6 months.
Wow. So that's pretty quick to be making those asks,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. And how big is your staff?
There are 5 of us. There's myself, there's a manager of corporations and foundations, a new associate director of development, special events, a development coordinator, and a database coordinator.
Okay, good. And do you feel like that's what you need, or if you could have more staff, would you do more staff?
I would definitely want more staff, and I think if you ask any development professional that, they will tell you the more, the merrier in most cases. I think we have needs in terms of major gifts fundraising. There's tremendous opportunity here in Houston. And I think major gifts are really the wave of the future, especially for our organization. Currently, about 48% of our funding comes from government grants. About 39% comes from contributed revenue. So that's individuals, corporations, foundations. Another 10% from United Way. Well, we're starting to see a shift where those government grants are starting to go away. So over the course of the next 5 to 7 years, that number is really going to shrink. So I'm in the process of developing a new major gifts program, and I'm working very closely with my director, my board chair,
Yeah.
who is my development board chair. We're working very closely. We've put a committee of about 6 board members together to begin identifying potential major gift prospects.
And talk about what a major gift is and what it looks like for you guys.
So a major gift for most organizations, some of the larger organizations that I've worked for are, or they begin at $25,000. At our organization, it begins at $5,000.
Okay.
There have been other organizations that I've worked for where a $10,000 gift was considered to be a major gift.
So you'll have someone who's actively looking for people to give $5,000 plus
Yes.
$5,000, $25,000, $50,000
Absolutely.
gifts just to go to Houston Area Women's Center or for maybe for a special program.
Yes.
Wow.
You know, of course, we love unrestricted
Yeah.
gifts. That's what I spend a majority of my time looking for in terms of, you know, identifying potential donors that can contribute. You know, in most instances, I'm personally looking for individuals or organizations that can contribute $25,000, $50,000 and more. I think that's the easiest way and the quickest way to get to your overall goal.
Yeah. I want to step back a little bit. Tell us very briefly what the Houston Area Women's Center does.
Well, we support survivors of domestic and sexual abuse in terms of helping them move their lives forward. It's an amazing organization, and as I shared with you earlier, you know, I was really passionate about the mission and the cause, and for me it was a way to give back. My sister is a domestic violence survivor, and I know the power of counseling, and you know, we had an agency in South Carolina that supported her during a very difficult time. So it does amazing work for adults, children, men, women, and children.
And if you had to say sort of the majority, this is women who have been abused by their husband and they need a place to go.
Yes.
And so you have a number of shelters that
No, we actually have one shelter.
One shelter.
It's a 120-bed shelter.
hidden away.
Hidden
secret-
away, it's
secret
in an
location.
undisclosed
Right.
location. It far exceeds anything you would ever imagine a shelter to be. I'd love to have an opportunity to give you a tour of it. I was very hesitant prior to taking my first shelter tour because I thought about it being very dark, dingy. It's not that at all.
And it's not what the women want or the children that go with them, right?
Exactly. It's a wonderful place. It's a very therapeutic place. Our client averages, or the average client stays around 45, 46 days. They can stay at the shelter for up to 90 days.
Wow. And do you arrange sort of transitional housing for them? Is
We
that-
do. We have a transitional housing program. After they've exceeded or they've met the 90-day at the shelter, there is a transitional housing program. And then at our administrative offices, which are located on WA, we actually provide counseling services.
That's a valuable piece of real estate there on
It's
WA
a-
too. I'm sure
oh,
you guys
yeah.
know this, right?
It's in a premium location,
It
so
is,
I love
is.
it.
Now, let me ask you about your background because I know that the class will be very interested. Where did you grow up, Tara?
I am from South Carolina, a very small town not far from Myrtle Beach called Lake City, South Carolina,
And where did you go to college?
the University of South Carolina.
So you were right there in South Carolina. And what was the move? How did you make this move?
Well, initially I wanted to be a retail buyer, so I spent a number of years working in retail. And 12 years ago, I randomly decided that I wanted to move to a larger city, a city that
Lake
had...
City was not big enough for you.
No, it wasn't big enough for me. But I wanted to be in a city that had sports, the arts, things that I'm really interested in and very passionate about. And so I randomly chose Houston and actually drove my own U-Haul truck here.
Wow.
Flew home, got my car and my dog, and I moved here not knowing anyone. At that time, I was a retail store manager. I think I stayed in retail for maybe 4 or 5 months after moving here.
What store did
And
you work at when you
I worked
first?
for Gap.
Oh, for the Gap.
Yes, I worked for Gap. That's where I got my start. But during the process of working for Gap and trying to figure out, do I really want to be a retail buyer? After conducting a lot of research, I decided maybe this isn't the right direction. You're basically given one bad buying season before you're terminated if you're a buyer. And so if you're buying products that don't sell that season, they replace you very
No
quickly.
mistakes allowed.
Not very many mistakes allowed.
Yeah.
And development just kind of happened. After.
But did you go right to the Rockets though? After
No, I did
Oh,
not.
okay.
I actually spent a year working for a commercial interior design firm.
Wow.
That was interesting. I was on the project management side. And so I ended up at the Houston Rockets because I was at a conference at the convention center and met someone in the bathroom of all places, and we started talking about hair.
Where all of us find our best jobs, in the bathroom.
Yes. At the end of the conversation, she said, if you're ever looking for a job, give me a call. And she gave me her business card, and I looked down, and I saw the Rockets logo. And she said, you know what, just send me your resume anyway. And so I ended up there a couple of months later.
Wow.
And spent almost 5 years there and ended up managing their premium sales department.
Wow. How did you like that? How did you like being at the Rockets?
I loved it. It was probably one of my best jobs. And I always share with everyone that, and this doesn't happen very often, but I feel like I've lived my dream so many times because I've created so many opportunities for myself. And I would literally get goosebumps walking into the arena every day, because for someone who grew up in a really small town in Lake City, South Carolina, to be working for the Houston Rockets was just unheard of.
Yeah. Wow.
I was actually a rock star at home. My parents enjoyed telling people, well, she works for the Rockets, and
Wow.
it's so amazing. And
Of the major sports, basketball is my favorite. I'm just guessing it's the same for you.
I love all sports.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I'm a sports fanatic.
Yeah.
My husband's a sports recruiter, and so we love
There
sports.
you go. There you go. And so, was it from the Rockets that you then decided to move into development?
Yes, I'd been with the Rockets for approximately 5 years, was starting to get a little burnt out, if you know professional sports and the number of home basketball games.
Yeah.
It's really grueling. It's a grueling schedule. And at that point, I'd been promoted 3 times within about 4.5 years. My next promotion would have probably meant me moving to a different city. I didn't want to leave Houston. I was actually happy here, and was talking to a very good friend of mine who I met years prior at the University of South Carolina, which is technically where I got my first start in development, because I worked for their phone-a-thon program.
Oh yeah, of course.
And we became really good friends, and she went on and has had a 20-plus year career in development. And we were talking, and I shared with her that I was really considering getting out of professional sports. And she said, you should go into development. And I'm like, really? Fundraising? Asking people for money? And she said, well, that's what you do now. You're asking people for money. You're
Right.
asking people to buy season tickets or suites, with the Rockets. And I said, well, I'll give it some thought. And so I started looking around, saw a posting for a position at the Houston Symphony. One would probably think that I'd have a musical background, and actually I don't. I play the flute, but I think I stopped playing the flute in the 11th grade. But I was really curious about it. For me, it was an opportunity to expose myself to something that I did not grow up with. And so I was not very familiar with classical music. I went in for my interview and met someone, David Rockoff, who's retired, but he's now become my mentor and friend, who actually took a chance, saw that my skill set was very transferable, hired me in, and that has been one of my more positive experiences
Wow.
working in development.
How long were you at the Symphony?
I was at the Symphony for about 3.5 years before I was recruited away. I still volunteer for them. I still have tremendous passion for the organization. I think that they do wonderful things in the community. I have grown to appreciate symphonic music But it was a great training ground for me as a development professional.
Yeah.
And from there, I went to St. Luke's Foundation. And so I've gone from retail to professional sports, to the arts, and then healthcare. And that was really interesting. I went there as a senior director of corporate relations. And so I was brought in to build their corporate relations department. St. Luke's was really unique in that, unlike some of the other healthcare systems here in Houston, there was not a robust fundraising program.
Yeah.
So they brought someone in who built out a staff relatively quickly and began to fundraise. I think one of my proudest moments is, when I go back and look at my resume, realizing that in my first year there, I was able to grow a program, the corporate fundraising program, from about $300,000 to $1.5 million in a very short period of time.
Wow.
With it just being me.
Yeah.
A year after being there, St. Luke's was actually purchased by Catholic Health Initiatives, which got really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think if you're familiar with mergers and acquisitions,
It's tough.
you see the writing on the wall,
Yep.
and there's a common sense factor. And I decided to, along with a few of my other peers, get ahead of the curve.
Well, some people want to wait it out and see what happens, but I always think that's the wrong move, isn't it? It's sort of like
For me, it wasn't the right
sort
move.
of take control of your own life.
There are still some former peers that are there that, they've decided to stay and wait it out. And I saw it as an opportunity, with seeing the writing on the wall, to actually begin to reassess my career and where I was. And I felt like I was at a point where I was no longer resume building. And so I started to explore opportunities that really connected with me personally. And so there were several agencies that I looked at, including your agency, and that's how we met,
Yeah.
and the Houston Area Women's Center. What's really neat about the Houston Area Women's Center is that when I went into, I think it was my third interview, there were board members there that I knew from the Houston Symphony, board members that I'd worked with before.
Wow.
And so they gave me an opportunity, and here I am.
What's the best thing about your job now as a director of development? What do you like the most?
I'm a people watcher. I love interacting with people. I love going into their homes. I love seeing how they live. I love learning about them. And if I could spend all of my time doing that, that's what I do. I love listening to their stories.
And it's amazing how they really are very welcoming and really want to be your friends, isn't it?
I will tell you, I had an encounter several years ago. I was driving into the parking lot. I was going to a Houston Symphony board meeting. And one of our board members, who's a very prominent, well-known, and very wealthy Houstonian, pulled in right next to me, and I think this was in week 3 of me working there. So I hadn't yet met all of the board members. And he jumped out of his Jeep Wrangler, and we're walking in together, and we just started talking. And when we got up to the floor where we were having our meeting, my director of development introduced us. He was one of our board members and one of the wealthiest men in Houston, very unassuming. Again, drove up in his Jeep Wrangler, nothing flashy. A couple of years later, I had the opportunity to attend an event in his home. And when I walked in the foyer area, there were 14 Picassos
That's amazing.
on the wall. And I had been told that they'd stayed in his attic for years, and he'd only recently put them in the foyer area. So those are really cool,
Yeah,
really
those are
neat,
interesting
interesting stories.
I wonder sometimes when you talk about stories like that, we will sometimes see cachet in someone who is, very wealthy and has been very successful. And I wonder if they don't sometimes see cachet in sort of the nonprofit people, like here are people giving of their life to better our community. I wonder if there's some of that, because it is surprising how easily friendships are struck up, right, around these things.
I would say yes. I'm really fortunate in that I work with an amazing board at the Houston Area Women's Center. And they are very appreciative of the development team, of our program staff, for the work that we do. Many of them are in very prominent roles with organizations here in the community. But they're really touched by the work that we do.
Yeah.
They understand what we do, and most importantly, they appreciate what we do. And so I hear on a regular basis from board members, thank you.
Yeah. Isn't
And
that
that's
nice?
important.
That's
It's
a
very
nice thing.
important.
Tara, what's the toughest thing about development, and in your situation, being the director of development of the Houston Area Women's Center, what's your biggest challenge?
I would say for me, my biggest challenge today is not having as much resources as I'd
Yeah.
like to have. I'd say the other is you're wearing about 20 different hats on any given day. And so I'm a true fundraiser at heart. There are probably other development professionals that would say their biggest challenge is hearing no or the fear of rejection. That's not a challenge for me because no today isn't necessarily no tomorrow. But again, I go back to the resources and not having enough time to truly go out and do as much fundraising as I'd like to do because there's so much work to be done on the administrative side. I'll give you an example. I spent the first 3 hours of my morning in a budgeting meeting.
Wow.
A budgeting meeting.
Just
I'm
where
a
you wanted to
fundraiser.
be. Yeah.
I'd rather be out asking for money than sitting in a budgeting meeting. But for me, because it's such a small team, I am the point person in the agency for so many different things.
You know, you talk about your lack of resources. Do you believe that if you had, say, 2 other people on your staff, and make this a sort of a general question, in general, in development areas, if they added 2 people onto their staff, could they more than make up for that staff?
Absolutely. It's an investment in the agency's
So
future.
why aren't more places doing that?
I think it's fear-based decision making. You know, we've always done things this way. We'll continue to do things this way. But it's a tremendous return on
Yeah.
investment. You will see the return. You won't see the return immediately. And I would tell anyone, it's going to take you a couple of years before you actually see the return. But once it starts to come in, you're going to sit there and scratch your head and say, why didn't I do this sooner? Why didn't, I go to the board and advocate for more resources in growing this development department? And that's pretty common with smaller nonprofits.
Yeah, I see that a lot too. I see underperforming nonprofits that should be doing significantly better, right? Because they haven't made that investment in fundraising. I'm always amazed when I look at child advocacy groups around the country. We get together many times, and there'll be these, Kansas, Missouri, and New Hampshire, these 3-people offices, and they don't have a fundraiser. And I think you guys could be doing so much better.
Well, I think a lot of agencies rely heavily on government support, government grants. They don't really diversify their portfolios, and so they're depending on one source of revenue. Unfortunately, the agencies go away when that funding source goes away.
Yeah. When you look around town at some of the sort of overperformers, sort of the overachievers of organizations in regards to fundraising, which organizations sort of pop out to you as places that have done extraordinarily well?
That's a really difficult question because I think on any given day of the week, it could be any of our agencies that are standing out. I think what you'll see is, and because I've worked in healthcare, so the foundations that are related to healthcare, especially someone such as a Texas Children's or an MD Anderson, if your mission is to eventually one day cure cancer, or you're there to provide services to children, in a lot of those instances, you're exceeding all expectations in terms of the amount of revenue that you're able to raise. I've seen it to a certain level in the arts. There are some arts organizations. I think that the opera is well known for its ability to fundraise. The Houston Symphony is definitely an up-and-coming powerhouse in terms of the arts. The Museum of Fine Arts.
They're so good.
They've been phenomenal for years. And so I think on any given day, it could be any of those.
Yeah. There are some great fundraising groups in town.
There are some great fundraising groups, and there's some great fundraisers.
One of the assignments that students in this class have at the end of the semester is to come up with a campaign or a special event to raise a substantial amount of money, and they're working with different organizations. If you were brought into an organization and they said, we need to figure out a way to have a quick infusion of money, is there a best way to do that? Knowing that every organization is pretty different, but just picking any organization, what would you do?
I'm not really a big fan of special events. I think if you were to really break the time and the numbers and do a true assessment of it, you're not going to see a huge
Takes a lot of
return
time.
on investment.
Yeah.
And so I'm typically not going to tell you to add another special event to what you're doing. I think that if there are current special events that you're working on, then I'm going to take a closer look at those. Because typically special events, they're a way to bring money in pretty quickly. It's something tangible. It's something that a lot of people can relate to.
It's unrestricted.
So it's unrestricted. So if there's an existing special event, I would probably focus my attention there. Again, I'm a huge advocate of major gifts programs. I think that that's the wave of the future in terms of fundraising. Well, that's more of an investment in time, and so you're not going to see the quick cash coming out of that.
It's interesting. And I think on the special event, we talked about this before, it could all depend upon who your chair is of that event as well.
That's
I mean, if you
critical.
need a quick infusion of cash, you just need to get the right chair,
You
right?
get the right chair, and it could take your event from a $400,000 or $500,000 event to a $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 event.
Yeah,
And
it's
you need
amazing.
someone that understands philanthropy, that understands fundraising, and you need a chair who's not afraid to pick up the phone and call people from within their sphere of influence. That's critical. And you have many of those in Houston.
Yeah.
You have a lot of them in Houston.
What's the biggest mistake that nonprofits make around fundraising? Is it not hiring enough staff, or are there other mistakes that they're making out there?
You know, again, not having enough resources, not hiring enough staff, not diversifying their, funding sources. You know, I've heard many stories of, agencies that are running, deficits that are well into, the hundreds of thousands of dollars because they've been so dependent on, one or two funding sources. And then what I've seen a lot of is I've seen agencies that hire one person to do the job of 2 or 3 people saying, well, I'm just going to take this development position and I'm going to build communications into it and I'm going to build, 3, 4 other things into it. And realistically, that can't be done.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to do 5 things, 10 things, that means that you're not doing any one thing particularly well.
Interesting. I'm going to go to some of the questions that a number of students have tweeted in. I'll try to answer most of their questions, at least give each student a chance to ask one. Richard Kendall was the first to tweet something in. He wanted to know, are there any development lessons that you learned by doing ticket sales for the Rockets?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, the skill set is transferable. So in selling tickets to the Houston Rockets, that basically helped me, develop very thick skin because you're hearing people say no. In development and fundraising, you're gonna hear no probably 90% of the time. And so for every, 9 call or every 10 calls that you make, 9 of those will say, no, this isn't really the right time. But then there's that one person that says, you know what, I can really relate to your mission. I think you guys are doing great work. And so again, the skill set was very transferable.
Marta Alvarenga wants to know, have you guys recovered, has the Houston Area Women's Center recovered from the Astros canceling that big fundraiser that they used to do for you. So was it the Astros wives
It was
that
the
used to do?
Astros wives.
And how much would that bring in every year?
$250,000
That's
annually.
that's a big hit.
That's a big hit when you're, talking about a $7 million
Yeah.
annual budget, an organization that has around a $7 million budget. Have we fully recovered? No, we haven't. That's one of my jobs, to identify some new funding sources. The community responded in such a wonderful way. We received many one-time donations, which really helped us make up that gap last year. But the Astro Wives had been such a huge part of the agency
Why did
for
they
so many
cancel,
years.
by the way? Are they doing something else, or?
Well, I think with new ownership, their focus and their mission changed completely, and we are very respectful of that. And so for us, it's about identifying new relationships and building more sustainable revenue.
Wow. Martha also wanted to know, you have Margaret Cho coming up.
Yes.
She wanted to know, how was she selected? Why was she selected? And what do you think you'll raise with her being there?
Well, that's a very interesting process. And basically our chairs typically drive your entertainment.
More than the
And
entertainment, that's sort of an interesting thing. People would think you have Margaret Cho, she's a big name, but it's really still about the chairs, isn't it?
It's really about the chairs and their preference and what they're interested in. The Houston Area Women's Center has built a reputation of bringing in female comedians, and the chairs wanted to continue with that tradition. And we began the process of identifying potential entertainers. Of course, what's important is looking at the backgrounds and views of the comedians, and also the price point is extremely important. We narrowed it down to, I think it was 2 comedians, and Margaret Cho was the overwhelming favorite.
Oh, good.
In terms of her driving revenue, I don't necessarily think that she'll drive revenue because of the price point.
Yeah.
Our tables start at $6,000 and go up to $50,000, and individual tickets are $600. So I don't think she'll drive ticket sales.
Wow.
It's the chairs that typically drive ticket sales, and the chairs and the board. We have a phenomenal board. Our board has definitely stepped up and has been making gala fundraising calls.
And when you look at a big event like that, $6,000 for a table, and I think we might have talked about this here before, but people don't expect to get $6,000 worth of food and entertainment.
Absolutely not.
It's really, they're giving to the
organization. The fair market value per person is around $225. So they understand that the majority of the dollars that are being contributed through the gala or any other special event is going to support the agency and provide those unrestricted funds.
But I understand when a student talks about that, because I think I was probably there at some point too, when I think $6,000 table, what am I going to get? Gold-plated cookies, but it's not about getting something.
It's not about getting something.
Nicole Amaya wants to know, how do you approach a new potential donor or an old one to get them to donate? Are there tips that you could share with students on this?
Cultivation and building relationships. People give to people. And I think that as you're identifying new prospects, you have to go out and visit with them. We have a very powerful tool with the Houston Area Women's Center in that I can invite prospects to go on a shelter tour. That speaks for itself. We have the ability to walk them through every part of the shelter and let them see where a portion of their funds are going and what they're supporting. It's pretty difficult at the end of a shelter tour to say no if you're asked to contribute. But there are other prospects that they're not interested in going on a shelter tour. They want to learn more about the organization. And for me as a development professional, I need to learn more about them and what drives them. and what kind of a legacy they're looking to build through their philanthropy. And so, again, I sit and listen when given the opportunity to ask them questions about their philanthropy and the other organizations that they're supporting. I'm making those mental notes so that, I can make the most appropriate ask.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Amy Cole Guzman wants to know, in fundraising, how do you differentiate the Houston Area Women's Center from competitors? Are there competitors for the Houston Area Women's Center? I mean, you guys are really
I think we're
big dog, aren't you?
standalone in terms of that. I think we don't necessarily view them as competitors.
Yeah.
We see them more as partnering with a sister organization. There are some things that we do exceptionally well that some of the other smaller organizations are not able to do. There's some things that they do better. So we see it as partnering with other agencies and not necessarily competing. I guess you'd say, well, of course you're competing because you're competing for the same philanthropic dollars. But again, I think that there's more than enough money here in Houston to support our agency and some of the other sister agencies as well that provide some of the same services that we provide.
When Debbie Lackey was here, she talked about pockets of excellence, that there are certain things that some organizations do that are just extraordinary. When you talk about sort of what's the thing that you guys do that's really super extraordinary? Is it saving women and giving them a shelter for a while? I mean, is that you do it like no one else?
It's saving lives.
Yeah.
Our hotline fuels more than 46,000 calls annually.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
And sad too, isn't it? Yeah.
And very sad.
Yeah.
And so when you look at our reach into the community and what we're able to do, I would say that would have to fit within a pocket of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, there's some things that we do exceptionally well. Our program counselors are phenomenal. Our educators that are going out into the communities, going out into the schools. Primary prevention is critical.
Mm-hmm.
What we'd like to do is eliminate domestic and sexual violence.
Yeah.
And it starts with preventing it and going out into the community and, working with kids, going into schools, working with kids.
Yeah, yeah. Samantha Coates wants to know, how do you compare the experiences of fundraising for a hospital, an arts organization, now a human services organization? There are a lot of similarities, but what are some of the key differences?
It's very simple. It's about building relationships.
It's really that, isn't it?
It's that, you're selling a brand. So with every place that, I've worked as a development professional or, worked in sales or retail sales, it's really been about relationships, getting to know who your clients, your donors are, getting to know what their likes and their dislikes are. So again, I can't say this enough. If you don't have relationships, it's pretty difficult to pick up the phone and call someone and ask them to make a $10,000 gift or a $100,000 gift if you haven't invested the time and energy in getting to know them.
Mm-hmm. Monica Sines has a good question today. When given an important or huge assignment, a big thing that you have in front of you, how do you go about approaching it? Sort of a different question.
It's a very different question.
Yeah.
It really depends on the assignment. I'm pretty fearless on the fundraising side. On the budgeting side, not so much is fearless. So again, I'll go back to my example of the budgeting meeting that I was in this morning for 3 hours. It was myself and the CFO. And I'd been putting this off, for weeks because I said, I'm not really a numbers person. I'm a fundraiser. I go out and raise the money so that you can then decide what to do with it. But depending on the assignment, I'm looking to either bring other people in, so collaborate on the assignment if it's something that I don't have the ability to do independently, or I'm looking to my staff to delegate portions of the assignment to them. But, it's difficult. It's a good question, but it's also a difficult question because I think it depends on what the assignment is.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm not afraid to ask for help. You can't be.
Mm-hmm. Denise Small wants to know, has there been a particular defining moment for you in your development career?
A defining moment.
What's been one of
I
the most
think-
exciting things that you've done development-wise?
Well, I'm going to go back to the defining moment.
Okay.
I think that when I made the decision that it was no longer about building my resume and it was more about connecting with a great organization, for me, that was a defining moment in making the decision to work for the Houston Area Women's Center.
Yeah, it was a big deal for you.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, I was at a point where I did a lot of soul searching.
Raquel Ramos has a question about how do you handle an employee who has historically performed well, but falters or lapses on a project?
That happens. That happens
does,
to
doesn't
the
it?
best of us.
The key thing was historically performs well on that question.
Historically performs well, and if it's someone who has historically performed well, that's someone that I can work with and work around. I think it's important to identify what's going on with that person at that particular time. There may be a particular reason why, you know, they faltered on this particular project. Maybe it's something that I can help them work through. It might have been because I didn't completely or clearly communicate the assignment to them. And so instead of pointing the finger and looking at fault and the fact that they faltered on it, you know, my approach is typically to look at how do we resolve this? How do we work through this together?
Another great question from Raquel. She wants to know, what do you want the development department at the Houston Area Women's Center to look like in 5 years, in 10 years? I mean, you're a pretty aggressive person when it comes to fundraising. You're always looking for the future. What are you seeing in the future there, if things go the way you think they're going to go?
I would like a team of development professionals that are as passionate as I am about the profession itself. I'd like a team of fearless fundraisers that they want to, you know, not just meet goals, but exceed goals. I want a team of people that truly want to be there because they are also driven by the mission. And for them, it's not about it being a job. It's not about paying rent. It's about really wanting to work for this agency.
Wow. We have a question from Ashol. Ashol just returned from the South Sudan, which is her home.
Okay.
And she's now back in town. And she wants to know, what tips would you give to someone who's just beginning their career in development?
So development doesn't happen overnight. Becoming a chief development officer or director of development, in most cases, does not happen overnight. And so I would say to someone, you know, you really have to be patient. You have to serve your dues. You have to be willing to, you know, take the rejection, take it, but don't take it personally. And learn as much as you possibly can. You know, before I got into development, I actually joined the Association of Fundraising Professionals.
That's a
and
great
started,
tip.
Yes, started networking with development professionals because I said, okay, this is where I'd like to be. And so I'm able to, you know, through the relationships that I've built with my peers from other organizations, I'm able to pick up the phone and, you know, when there's a difficult question that, you know, I can't answer, or when I need a little bit of guidance from someone, you know, I look to my peers from other agencies.
And I think people would be surprised to know that even other development professionals are happy to help you out.
Absolutely.
You know, you would think, I remember when I first started at Children at Risk, you know, you had the development committee of your board, and I felt like it was a lot of people who didn't know about development, but they had good hearts, right? But I remember going and asking a few directors of development at other organizations if they would serve on that committee, and they were happy to do
Yes.
that. And so it seems odd that here you are in charge of fundraising at a place, and you're not going to make calls, but you're certainly going to give the right advice on how to make those calls.
Oh, absolutely.
Sort of an interesting
You know, I
thing.
call other development professionals all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
It makes a big difference. Sharhonda Cox wants to know, and you've answered this a little bit, but do you ever fall into the trap of judging a potential donor by their look?
We call it curbside qualifying, and I've learned over the years, and this goes back to my retail sales day, that you can't always judge a book by its cover. And there are resources and tools that give us the ability to do wealth analysis. And so we're able to do a lot of research prior to going in and meeting with prospects. Sometimes that's not the case. You could be at an event where, you meet someone, you have a conversation, you may have an inkling, a feeling. It may be true, it may not be true, but I've learned to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. You have donors that contribute to organizations $100 a year for 20, 30 years, and you're thinking, okay, there's not tremendous wealth here. Actually, that's not true.
Right.
Those are your best plan-giving prospects. These are people that leave huge amounts of money in their wills and in their estates to organizations. And, had we curbside qualified them at the fact that, okay, they've only given us $100 a year, over the past X number of years, we would have lost out on a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah. I remember reading something somewhere that a Rolls-Royce salesman was saying that he sells more Rolls-Royces to people who show up in jeans and sneakers than to people who show up in suits. And you can sort of see that, right?
Yes, I will tell you a funny story. My husband and I were in the market in December to purchase a car.
For Rolls-Royce?
Not for a Rolls-Royce. Unfortunately, no, not yet. And, I typically on the weekends, I dress down in, jeans and a sweater. And we went to one dealership in particular that basically did not give us the time of day.
Wow.
And I guess it looked like we could not afford their particular product.
Yeah.
And I got really frustrated and really angry. And I said, maybe I'll go back in a suit and see what the response is. And my husband said, no, we're going to go to the dealership on,
Right.
the other side of town, and we'll see what happens there. Not even a minute after we drove up, we were greeted.
Yeah.
And we purchased a car in less than an hour and a half, and had the best experience.
Yeah. It makes a difference. I mean,
It
people
makes a
need to not
difference.
do that, especially in a town like Houston. You really just
Yes.
can't be judging people.
You can't. You
So,
really can't.
yeah.
There are people that drive Maseratis that will pick up the phone and call you and tell you, I'm going to need to delay paying my pledge for another year or a year and a half because, we don't necessarily have the cash flow. I've had that happen
Yeah.
before.
Interesting. A last question from one of the class members. When do you have the most fun at work?
When do I have the most fun? Wow, that's a tough question.
I thought it was, yeah.
I would say I love interacting with our executive leadership team. We have a phenomenal group. It just happens so that we're all women, but it's a phenomenal group of women that I work very closely with. Outside of working with them, I'd say I have the most fun when I'm out interacting with prospects and donors, because that's who I am. That's
Is it pure
what I
fun
do.
for you?
It's very enjoyable.
Yeah.
There's some times that it's fun, other times that it's work.
Yeah.
I would say the majority of the time, it's still fun.
Yeah. And I'm sure, and if you're like me at all, Tara, there are some board members, some donors who you really do have a blast with, right? I mean, that you
Yes.
just have a really
Yes,
good time that
there
are
are
very
some.
nice. Yeah. You look forward to lunches with them and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, as we wind down for the evening, your work-life balance. There are so many leaders and directors of development who sat in that chair and say, I don't really have work-life balance. Can you give us some hope in this regard?
I create work-life balance during certain parts of the year. Really am driven by the needs of the organization and what we're currently doing. And so there are times of the year-end giving is huge for our agency. And so that's what my focus is on. It's going out on those last-minute calls to get those gifts in at the end of the year. Leading up to a large special event such as our Race Against Violence, which was huge this year. We had close to 2,700 participants. Well, for the month of February, I did not sleep. I probably worked close to 300 hours, that month alone. And so it depends on what's going on, but I do find that I'm able to, and I plan my year out in advance, and it may sound really weird, but I look at when I'm able to vacation and take time outside of the office. So one of the things that my husband and I do is we go on a fabulous vacation every year. And it just happens that this year we're going on 2. And so I'm looking forward to that time.
Now, where are you going on vacation? I'm going to go ahead and
Well,
ask you.
in May, we're going to the Grand Cayman Islands. Looking forward to that. And then we're going to London in October for an
Fantastic.
NFL game.
Oh, wow.
Yes, that's going to be a
Sports
lot.
and London
Sports
together.
and London.
Yeah.
So for him, work. For me, vacation. But I actually plan time where I can really have downtime, because our job is very difficult. And yes, I live on my cell phone sometimes. You know, I'm awake 2, 3 o'clock in the morning returning emails at times. But for me, I've learned over the years to not live every day like that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
It is true that we have to plan our vacations well in advance.
Yes.
You know, I also have all my vacations planned out for
Yes.
the year. Fun question for you. Favorite restaurant in town?
So I have many. That's I actually gained about 30 pounds after I moved to Houston, because there were so many great restaurants. And so my favorite restaurant changes maybe once a month. So I'm going to talk about 2 of my favorites
Okay.
right now. So Killian Steakhouse in Pearland,
Wow.
because
that's
I
a
live
great
in
place.
Pearland.
Oh, you live there?
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's awesome. From the outside, it looks like a dive, but it's incredible. And another really great spot for me is Sorrento's
Yeah.
on Westheimer.
Yeah.
And so there are 2 friends that we typically meet once every 2, 3 months, and that's our favorite place to meet.
Wow.
I love the truffle risotto.
Wow.
It's awesome.
Sorrento's is a nice place. Have you been to Killian's new barbecue place?
No, my husband and I have been talking about going.
Yeah. I have a buddy who lives in Pearland, and he can't talk about anything but that.
Really? They just recently opened the
But-
barbecue spot.
But I guess you have to go wait in line. He said he had to bring a lawn chair with him to move a line because it was just such a long line.
It's pretty intense. For years, they would just have a pop-up tent. And then that became so popular, they decided to open a restaurant. So we haven't yet gone, but we're looking forward to going after Lent.
And do you have a favorite sort of secret place in Houston that not many people know about? Could be another restaurant, could be a park, could be a little place that you go that you like.
Well, my favorite secret place of the moment, which is not necessarily so much of a secret because I tell everyone about it now, is Title Boxing Club in Pearland.
I've never heard of this little secret
I've
place.
been boxing now since November. I've lost 22 pounds. It's the toughest thing I've ever done, but it's the best thing I've ever done.
Wow.
So I get up and I go to the 5:45 a.m. class,
Every day?
Monday through Friday, because I
Wow.
like to have my weekends
Sure.
off. And I tell you, it's a workout. You're burning 1,000 calories or more per class.
And getting all that.
You're getting the aggression and the tension out. And it's a great way to start your day.
Wow.
It's really helped in terms of relieving stress, and it's something that my husband and I do together on occasions.
Oh.
He's not a morning person, but I did talk him into going this morning.
Wow.
But I love it. The classes are growing, so it's becoming not as much a secret as
You've
it
been
used to
telling
be.
too many people, apparently.
We've been telling everyone that will listen that you will enjoy this. You will hate it while you're doing it because it's the toughest workout. I've hired
Really?
many trainers.
Yeah.
I've done probably everything known to mankind. This is the first thing that I've consistently stuck with for an extended period of time. Love it.
Wow, very nice little secret. And then when they make the Tara Black story in Hollywood, who's going to play you?
You know, I actually, I've thought about that because you were kind enough to send me a couple of questions in advance, so thank you. That's a really tough one because there are some great actresses that I really admire. And so on one day, it could be Meryl Streep because I loved her role in The Devil Wears Prada,
Yes.
which is actually my favorite movie of all times. On another day, it could be Kerry Washington simply because I love Scandal and everything that she does right now.
People love that show.
It's addictive.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's very over the top, but it's awesome because it's mindless TV. So for an hour, you sit there and you think of nothing else other than, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next?
And this is the one she's having an affair with the president
Yes,
or something, right?
yes,
Yeah.
it's really over the top. And then I'd have to say, on another day, with the more serious side of me, I would probably say Angela Bassett, because I'm
Oh, yeah.
a huge fan of hers as well.
Wow.
So
And she probably does boxing. I mean, she has those arms that are just.
she has guns. They look
yeah.
amazing. She's in great shape. So
Wow. Tara Black, thank you so much for being with the class
Thank
and
you
being
for
here in the
having me.
Leadership Studio. So enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for all that you're doing for Houston and for women in our community.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it and hope to see you again soon.
absolutely, I've enjoyed it tonight.
Very good. Well, we'll see you next time on the Leadership Studio. Only a couple more left before the end of the semester, but we'll see you next time.